same way. So thank you all for showing up in large numbers. Right now, I'm actually studying international relations at the United States International University of in Africa, and just to open the discussion and frame who we are trying to support, we want to play a short video just to hear the voices of the girls that we want to support this particular day. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nancy. I'm from Nanyuki, Kenya.
Hello, my name is Mary. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm 16 years old and I've just finished my lower secondary school.
I have my whole life mapped out for me.
I have plans to further my education and live the life I dream of.
At school, the teachers did not give much attention to girls. We were mostly ridiculed and punished. It was clear that boys were more important at school.
At school, I feel included. The teachers helped me learn and encouraged me to dream big. It was very clear at school that my school wanted both boys and girls to succeed.
I struggled for every year to stay on at school. My parents did not really value my education.
I studied very hard and was encouraged by both of my parents to do well.
Now, this is the end. I'm sure my life will be exactly like my mother's.
My life will be better than my mother's.
We'll soon be married and take a job as a domestic worker.
I'll go to senior secondary school, decide on the career I want, and go to the university and follow my dream.
I will not get the chance to change my life, and I will not be able to take better care of my children.
I'll contribute to my community and help build my country.
I don't imagine I will earn enough to send my kids to secondary school either.
And I will definitely make sure my kids get an education just like I did.
No, it will be a struggle, but I must do everything in my power to give my kids an education beyond what I achieved. Education is the only way to give my kids and their families healthier and more prosperous lives.
Wow, that was a touching story by two girls. It's more like a debate, but just to show you the brief and the struggle that girls go through in terms of education in the family, being a patriarchal family. The story for me, I think it has just, it's closer to home. It has hit exactly the kind of life that I have struggled to get here in school, and it has really resonated with, and there are many girls out there crying for change and to be able to make it up to the highest level of education. And just to comment on the video, I think that was one touching story the girls have portrayed here today. I would like to swiftly move on to introducing Ms. Clementine Ngweta Salami to give us an overview of the specific challenges faced by refugee girls when it comes to education. She is the Regional Director for UNHCR East and Horn of Africa and Great Lakes region. Let's welcome Ms. Clementine. Please take it over.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and a very thought-provoking video indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as we celebrate the International Day of the Girl Child today, I am particularly delighted that we have an opportunity to focus attention on financing education for girls, as well as how to ensure that all girls start and finish school. In my travels throughout the region, I consistently hear from refugee girls and their families about their aspirations for higher education. The aspirations and the reality are, however, not always aligned. At UNHCR and within the humanitarian community, we have set lofty, ambitious goals on protection from violence and access to education for the millions of refugees and internally displaced women and girls on the continent. The Global Compact on Refugees and Sustainable Development Goal 4 both affirm the right of refugees to access education. The challenge is not a difference in what refugees want for themselves and what we want. The challenge is that they cannot be achieved by merely setting aspirational goals. Profound transformational change is required to ensure that all refugee children, boys and girls, start and finish school, and that this not only opens doors to livelihood opportunities, but equips them with the knowledge and tools that will allow them to eventually assume roles and responsibilities as change makers and nation builders. This year, our perspectives, challenges, and solutions are influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in school closures, causing all children to lose out on school, and for many marginalized children to experience increased inequality. We estimate that half of all displaced girls will not return when classrooms reopen. This is especially true for adolescent girls who face heightened risks. For example, in some countries in the region, the refugee girls' gross secondary enrollment was already as low as 10%, and in such locations, these girls are at risk of dropping out for good. A lot of effort has gone into supporting education for girls, particularly during the school closures and openings. Many children, particularly girls, did not return as they grappled with the opportunity cost of earning a small wage, family commitments, and household duties. UNHCR and our partners have been involved in various activities to encourage school attendance, including providing bicycles to transport girls safely to school in Uganda, back to school campaigns in Tanzania, running peer support clubs, remedial education programs, cash initiatives supporting girls' enrollment and retention, as well as connected education programming across the region. In addition, we are working with scholarship partners to actively promote a 50% quota of female students for higher education scholarships. We have greatly benefited from our private sector partners, such as Lego Foundation and Vodafone Foundation. They have been instrumental in improvement in quality and access to educational content that supports refugee children on their education journey. These are just a few of the initiatives. The diversity of innovative programs is adapted to each context and the challenges raised by the community. While impressive gains have been made in the inclusion of refugee children in education, refugee girls continue to lag behind. Globally, gross enrollment rates for refugee girls at the primary level is at 67%, and the disparity increases at the secondary level with only a 31% enrollment rate. It is clear that increased and sustained investment in refugee education is needed at all levels. Otherwise, we shall continue to see a large dropout of girls as they transition from primary to secondary school and to tertiary education. As we are all aware, secondary and higher education can protect refugee girls from early marriage, early pregnancies, and sexual exploitation. It is estimated that if all women had a secondary or university degree, child marriage and infant and maternal mortality would be significantly reduced, and preventable childhood disease and deaths would be reduced by half. The benefits of secondary and post-secondary education are numerous. It can lead to a high wage earnings and opportunities for family to break free from the cycle of poverty. Education additionally provides a safe space for personal development and positive social networks for young refugees girls whose transition to adulthood has been disrupted by conflict and displacement. One of the main barriers stopping girls from accessing their fundamental right to education is the lack of sustainable financing for programs that actively support girls through basic, post-primary, and secondary education programs. This lack of financing makes it difficult for humanitarian actors to support the aspirations of the refugee girls, and is only likely to worsen with the pandemic. There is therefore a need for all of us to work together to strengthen programs that include gender-responsive budgets and sustained financing that will allow girls to complete their education journeys. Today's discussion will allow us to reflect on how best humanitarian actors, private and public partners can work together. 18 months since the beginning of the pandemic, and with many schools across the region still closed, how we can work together to achieve better results. The response to the pandemic has necessitated the need to ensure sustained distance learning efforts for boys and girls. In some countries, such as Uganda, we know that schools will remain closed until January 2022. We need to invest in sustainable financing mechanisms that will help us provide wider support to bridging programs, remedial education support, catch-up classes, connected education programs, and many more proven programs that promote girls' education. We need sustainable financing to make education for all refugee girls a reality. I look forward to today's discussions. I would like to thank you for your attention and hand back the floor to our moderator, Hannah, for the next opening remarks. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you so much for framing our discussion and really highlighting the key gaps and challenges that refugee girls face in this region and when it comes to education. Moving on, for now, I'd like to invite Ms. Antara Ganguly. She is the Secretariat for UNGAI. I would like to invite her to really focus on the topic of this roundtable discussion, financing for girls' education, and its importance as to ensuring we can do better for all. That about 32 million girls access across the region who are currently out of school. Please welcome Ms. Antara.
Thank you so much. A very, very happy International Day of the Girl to everybody. I know that all my partners and colleagues here will join me in saying that all of us are looking forward to the day when we don't need to have such a day because we will have achieved equality in education. We've all heard it said that girls' education is the best investment we can make for our world's future. While there is some evidence for what works in girls' education, much less is known about effective costing and financing for girls' education. 2021 has been critical for us in recognizing the global setback in progress for girls' education because of the pandemic. At the same time, cuts to aid spending and increased pressure on national education budgets have exacerbated existing inequities, harming those furthest behind, usually girls and especially refugee girls. A key tool, in fact, a critical tool to address this is financing for girls' education. What does this mean? Does it mean a different pot of funds for girls and a different pot of funds for boys? The answer is no. What it does mean is to recognize and understand the different impacts of education spending on girls and boys, and then work to redress that balance. So what we want to do is to reorient spending for education in a way that addresses and corrects existing imbalances in how funding is allocated, with the goal of promoting gender equality. Let me give you an example. In many countries, education spending is allocated on a per pupil basis. So if you look at an education budget, it will say something like spend per pupil. This seems fair on the face of it. However, what if there are more girls out of school than boys? This is the case in 62% of low-income countries. In fact, UNESCO in their event today have pointed out that 9 million girls aged 6 to 11 will never go to school worldwide compared to 3 million boys. So that's 3 times as many girls. So let's go back to our spend per pupil. Over time, as the girls are dropping out of the school system, those who are in school, the boys and girls, are in fact getting those dollars that were meant for the girls who are out of school. The inverse would be true for contexts like Haiti or Jordan, where more boys have been out of school than girls for decades. And all of these factors are taken into account in what we call gender responsive public expenditure management. I know that's a mouthful, but this is a key tool in financing for girls' education. So what all of this does is to say, we need to understand who are the children farthest behind, and often those are girls. And today on International Day of the Girls, we're focusing on those children. And how do we safe space in our budget? How do we elevate these children? How do we elevate these girls who are out of school and provide funding from education ministries for them to come back to school, for them to have alternative learning pathways, including especially in humanitarian and protracted crisis situations? I'm going to stop here because we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who can share more on this important issue. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I'm so glad, as Angai, that we are talking about this important issue. I wish you all a happy International Day of the Girl. And let's hope that together, all of our efforts will be successful in identifying vulnerable girls, in making them visible, funding and championing vulnerable girls, and then watching together as they succeed and become the future leaders of our shared world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Antara, for highlighting those statistics and having to hit the nail in the head. And moving on, I would like to invite Mr. Mohamed Fall. He is the Regional Director of Unicef, Eastern and Southern Africa. Let me welcome him to give us an overview of the wider support given to African girls in the region. And yeah, the floor is yours. Welcome, Mr. Fall. Hello. I don't know if Mr. Fall can hear me. This is his moment. Okay. Okay. Because of some technicality, I think I'll just move on. So I think, to be honest, I'm really excited to be able to dive into the key challenge of financing for girls' education. As you all know, the objectives of this roundtable discussion is to find solutions and work together with government, public and private sector partners, as only together is the way we can find sustainable solutions to make sure everyone benefits or reach their goals. Um, to the panelists, we have around 6 panelists, and I will ask a series of questions. And please, I will request you take only 3 to 5 minutes max to answer your question. I will give you an opportunity at the end, if time allows, for discussion or for anyone who wants to react to the questions being highlighted. So my first panelist, or my first question, will go to Miss Christine McConnell. I hope she's there. Miss Christine McConnell, she's from the Global Partnership for Education. The GPE has been instrumental in supporting governments and strengthening the education system. She is the education specialist at GPE. And my question goes like this. Ms. McConnell, what is the GPE doing or considering doing to accelerate and support governments in sustaining and innovative financing for girls' education? Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for that wonderful question. And it's great, so great to be here today for this event on the International Day of the Girl Child. Thank you so much for having me. So I'll answer your question in a couple of different ways. So first of all, as many of you know, GPE had a very successful replenishment campaign this past summer, where we raised over $4 billion to transform education systems in 90 eligible countries, 26 of which are in this region, in Eastern and Southern Africa. So that's very, very exciting. So GPE is now hardwiring its new 2025 strategy, which hardwires gender equality into all areas of our work through inclusive education systems that are fit for the 21st century. So what does this practically mean? It means that GPE will support countries to systematically identify and address barriers to education that affect boys and girls differently. So that could be gender-based violence, teen pregnancy, early marriage, or limited access to remote learning. So we know that identifying the correct barriers is a critical first step to being able to address them. This will require partner countries, their local education groups, and other civil society and gender actors to acknowledge the gender social norms that enable these barriers to be there in the first place. And we know that every country will be different, and so will GPE support to them. So depending on the country, GPE will provide financial support for gender responsive planning, more disaggregated data systems, maybe gender sensitive learning materials and teacher training resources. Maybe it's resources for menstrual hygiene, awareness campaigns, community engagement, etc. We will also work with partners to identify how different stakeholders in GPE mechanism can strengthen gender equality. In the 30 countries where girls are most lagging behind, GPE will provide additional resources and targeted funding through the new Girls Education Accelerator to address these challenges. So many countries, which is very exciting to me, many countries in this region are eligible for this additional financing. So that includes Comoros, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique, Somalia, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. So unlocking this additional up to $25 million will require that governments commit to ambitious action for gender equality by investing in girls' education. And lastly, we will work with country partners and local education groups to adapt and learn through more disaggregated data, more gender diagnostic, and targeted learning on the different impacts of policies on boys and girls. So we know that these countries can course correct along the way to make sure that we're really working and adapting through evidence. But nevertheless, as we know that there's more work to do together, as a partnership, we will continue to advocate for getting girls back to school and in school completing 12 years of quality education, a task that we know is even more daunting due to COVID's impact on families and education. And so my ask to everyone participating in this event today is to all of us, as donors, as country partners, as civil society members, as teachers and other stakeholders, to really leverage our very rich expertise across the partnership in support of national gender equality impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kristen. It has been a wonderful response. Definitely, it's valuable to understand how we continue to work with the national systems. However, oftentimes, most of the vulnerable people, such as refugees, fall outside the formal, the vulnerable, the formal national systems. Thank you for highlighting that. It has been very instrumental. And I would like to move on and to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker, Ms. Yasmin Sharif. If she's around. Hi.
Yes, hi, I'm here.
All right, thank you. She's from the Education Cannot Wait Fund. And thank you for joining us today, Ms. Yasmin. And please accept my question. What is ECW doing or considering doing to accelerate and support sustainable and innovative financing for refugee girls' education?
Thank you very much, Hannah. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Well, it's not so much about what we are planning to do, it's actually what we are doing. We like in ECW to speak about what we do right now. And especially since the Refugee Forum last year that was convened by UNHCR. So I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we have been doing since and even before that. And as we are now scaling up, as we work both with ODA governments who are now increasingly scaling up their funding. Just for 1 week during the UN General Assembly, they came forward nearly $140 million. Just 1 week, one meeting. So we see ECW growing very fast. Let me start by saying that we are a United Nations Global Fund that is dedicated to education in emergencies and protracted crisis. So we don't cover the whole world. We are really zooming in on countries in crisis, conflict, and refugee hosting countries. And by being a part of the UN system, we use the UN coordination mechanisms. So when we have a refugee situation, it's always UNHCR that leads that coordination to bring everyone together on the basis of what they call the UN reform of working together, the new way of working and having joint programs, because no one can do it alone. There's far too much suffering and the biggest number of refugees since the Second World War. So we have to work together. So a typical ECW facilitated program in a refugee situation would look like this. UNHCR is in the lead, Save the Children, International Rescue Committee, Unicef, WFP, local organizations, communities, teacher associations in one big program. And then we put in funding for that, and we use that as a resource mobilization tool so that we can bring more money. In country, we raised about $1 billion, and in our trust fund about 800 million. And we are just 4 years old now. It's just the beginning. Now, today is the Girls' Day, the Girl Child Day, the 11th of October. So it's International Day of Girls. So it's good that you convene today. For us, our top priority is always those who are left furthest behind. And amongst them are the refugees. And if you look at the girls, we look at the adolescent girls, because there's a lot about primary education, but very little about secondary education. So for us to make sure that adolescent girls get the benefit from primary education is a top priority. Girls with disabilities. I mean, in many of these countries where we operate, mines in a country, mines are part of the warfare, or you are born with a disability and often you're hidden somewhere behind everyone else at home in the society. And girls who belong to the LGBTQT community is very important. We say the same for boys as well, of course, but when it comes to girls. And we also know already, and I will not repeat because all of you have already said the many challenges and risks faced by refugee girls about sexual exploitation, early marriage, forced labor, and so forth. But we're also seeing that the education for girls is dropping. You take Somalia, for instance, where there have been so many concurrent crises, where girls' enrollments have dropped from 45% to 29% only in 2020. Only in 2020. So you see an enormous drop. And we know that 50% of girls worldwide, in refugee girls, may never return to school after the pandemic. Now, what have we done? Well, we developed the very first, together with UNHCR, refugee response plan for South Sudanese refugees coming into Uganda. And we worked with the Ministry of Education and UNHCR and all our strategic donor partners and UNAIDS, civil society. So that's it's I must say, significantly funded, but that was our first big refugee response plan, where girls, of course, were put at the center. And let me say that in all ECW investment, we have a target of 60% girls in everything we do, but girls are not just a number. It's also to make sure that there is a whole of child approach. So MHPSS, school nutrition, protection. Protection is extremely important for girls. I mean, I've been traveling to Mali, to DRC, and you go and you see these schools, and you go to schools in Nigeria, and there's no protection. There's no walls, the transport there's no transport. So of course, the girls will be very prone to be abducted. So protection is absolutely key for girls' education. We worked with refugee girls in Ethiopia, in South Sudan, and in Sudan. We have a number of refugees from Eritrea and Ethiopia and Sudan. In the Sahel. I mean, Sahel is one of the poorest parts of the earth, and we know now with the conflicts that are raging in Central African Republic, I'm going to Cameroon very soon, and I was in DRC to see the refugees arriving together with the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, just a couple of months ago. And for those who wonder, what does ECW do? Well, I can tell you that 38% of ECW's investments are dedicated to refugees, of whom 60% are for girl refugees. So 38% of all the funding we invest goes straight to refugees. And when we had COVID-19, we actually had a special COVID-19 response, which we titled after Martin Luther King, The Fierce Urgency of Now. So we were very fast. I think the first 2 months of the COVID outbreak declared of WHO in delivering that, because we try less bureaucracy and more accountability and speed. Move now. Education cannot wait until we develop big, heavy documents. It has to happen now. These children, these girls cannot wait. So that was one thing we did. We also have a very strong gender strategy and the gender policy that we are rolling out. So that's part of our commitment to ensure that refugee girls above all are given top priority. But what we do as a fund is that we travel to them. So during COVID-19, we traveled to Cameroon, to the Sahel, to Congo, because they need us. They can't see us sitting on Zoom or sitting in our headquarters. We have to be there with them and see the reality on the ground. And I think that's what spurs us to move with such speed. I would take this opportunity to appeal to all our partners, strategic donor partners, whether it's private sector or ODA governments, please help us, help the girls and help them now, because education cannot wait. Let's work with the fierce urgency of now, as Martin Luther King said. Thank you very much.
Wow, amazing words there, Ms. Sheriff. And I must say I was motivated by your speech there, having to mention that you have the girl child at heart. All your works have shown that you really have the interest of the girl child at heart, and it doesn't matter the locality, what do you say, the handicap. You see, I'm even lost of words because of the amazing work that you guys have done. And then also having to respond to the COVID-19 and having a response to that just shows that clearly education can't wait, even the circumstances that we are under in right now. And your work is still being seen and exemplary well. Thank you. I would like to move on right now because of time. We have a short video from Mastercard. Before we hear from the Mastercard panelists, please, there's a video up there. Would like us all to, please enjoy it.
There is no sound.
I'm happy because I'm joining the university, and why it is important, because you learn and you get new information. بالذات المحل اللي احنا قاعدين هنا بنات كتير ما قاعدين بقروا زي الناس. انت لو عرسوك، انت لو مشيت المدرسة ما بتفكر كتير تاني عن المدرسة، كل كده بتاخد بالك عن شغل البيت. أنا اخترت القراية بتاعي ده ليه شنو؟ لأنه مع أنا قاعد هناك أنا اشتغلت في مكتب بتاع بنات بتاع إرشاد بتاع النساوين. يعني أنا قريت عن المشكلة اللي بواجه البنات كتير، عشان كده أنا اخترت هنا بتاعي psychology. I'm the one who get chance to join grade 11. Only one girl only, and the other girls they are get married. And if you get married in our region, again, you will not join the school, especially because you think about the home. My father, he told us, I don't like any girl to take married before he joined the university. يعني مثلا التعليم ده ما لي نفر واحد، ما لي بنات برا، التعليم ده لأي زول يعني مثلا.
There's a great opportunity for other organizations and partners to take up the chance to support this particular group of young people. So my call out there is to people who are willing to step in and support these young people to come in and in whichever capacity to support them so that they can be able to benefit from the opportunity of education available to any other person.
بنات أنا خليته وبعدين خشوا جربتوا لي ده زمان أنا جدا بيكوا كتير قالوا والله دارين كمان نلقوا فرصة زي حقك كده نمشي نحقحلوا مدرسة بتاعنا. مثلا أنا لو بنات لقوا فرصة زي ده كان أنا بكون فرحان شديد يعني.
Wow, that was one video that really encourages such organizations to maybe keep helping the girl child. Knowing the story of that girl, it's kind of resonates with what I've been through myself, having to sit in a class of 90 or 50, 60 boys, and you happen to be maybe the third or the second girl in that class. And it would be nice to have more girls in the education sector. Now, I would like to welcome Ms. Shona Bezanson. Thank you for joining us today. My question to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm so delighted to be here. It's great to see you. I'm so proud that you're a Mastercard Foundation scholar. I hope you can hear me okay. I had promised the organizers that my power was very, very stable. I'm here in Kigali, and yet 5 minutes ago it went out. So I will battle through. I'm here representing the Mastercard Foundation today. The Scholars Program is a program that was launched in 2012, and the goal of that program is to ignite the exceptional and exponential potential of young people in Africa, young people just like Hannah and Raba that we saw in the video. So to date, we've committed $1.3 billion to 41,000 scholarships at secondary and university education level in Africa. And our target is for 70% of those scholarships to be for young women. And so far, we're exceeding that target. 73% of our scholars are young women. The program also has a special focus on other hard-to-reach groups, and we have committed that of the 50,000 plus scholarships that we commit by 2025, 25% will be for refugees and displaced youth, and 10% for young people with disabilities. And we have seen lots of benefits to the intentional approach of targeting and reaching and serving young women and refugees. So firstly, of course, scholarships are life-changing, and especially for young women.
All right. I think Ms. Shona's connection was weak or strong because I think she dropped out of the call. Due to that, I'll move on to our next panelist because of time. Let's welcome Mr. Yates from Plan International. And I would like to introduce Mr. Yates from Plan International. And Plan International is an NGO which have worked a lot to ensure there is equity in education. Mr. Yates, you're there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, thank you. I would like to ask this question. Why is sustainable financing vital to ensure girls are able to complete their educational journeys?
Thank you, Hannah, and happy Day of the Girl to you and to everyone. I have to say you're doing such a good job. I'm so impressed. Thank you. So yeah, as others have said, the fact that these school closures that we've seen over COVID have forced so many children from the classroom and so many will never return, that this is further exacerbating the gaps in education. And we're seeing then an increase in child marriage and increases in adolescent pregnancy, which then ultimately undermine the longer term opportunities for girls. One of the figures that really struck me in preparing for this was that each additional year a girl completes secondary education cuts down early marriage by 6%. It's a fabulous number. And it's so important that if we can do that. So what we need is sustained education from early years to adulthood. That's clearly the most impactful education policy, and the Education Framework for Action 2030 set a commitment of 12 years safe and quality education for all children. It's crucial that this is implemented in all circumstances. As we heard from other speakers, it's particularly important to realise that in the most difficult circumstances, very often education funding is lost. So to sustain funding for education, governments must meet the international and regional benchmark of 20% of national budgets allocated for education. And that again is in the Education Framework for Action 2030. So governments have made the commitment and we must all help them to meet those commitments and remind them if they are struggling to do so. This is a choice. Cutting education financing as an austerity measure, as observed in several countries in relation to COVID, is a false economy, and that will cost countries as well as the students themselves in the long term. It's imperative that gender transformative education is the heart of any COVID recovery effort. We're going to see a lot of money going into COVID recovery now, so it's a real opportunity as well. And investments in education need to be increased to ensure that girls return to school and catch up on their education. The recent commitments, as we heard, in G7 and GPE, they were a great first step, but they didn't go far enough. Girls in all circumstances have the right to learn, and yet only 3% of global humanitarian funding is spent on education. So we need to make sure that when there is a crisis, that education is not lost. And we need to invest in the life skills and vocational education as tools to build stability and economic recovery in fragile countries. It's important to note that increasing resources alone does not necessarily result in educational improvement. We should make the schools work for girls so that girls are empowered in the classroom and build their agency to stay longer in school. And we must pay attention to those cultural and contextual elements that prevent girls from completing their schooling. We need to create better learning environments through provision of separate latrines, employing more female teachers, and providing a more gender transformative curriculum. And most importantly, we need to see girls and young women shaping the education systems and directly represented in decision-making spaces. No one knows what girls need better than girls themselves, as we just saw in the video. And this means shifting the power to young people by listening and treating them as leaders and decision makers in their own right, not just as passive beneficiaries. We have an opportunity to build back equal with more resilient education systems that have gender equality, gender justice, and human rights at their center. And status quo funding will simply not come. We must recognize that girls' education is imperative to COVID recovery and invest appropriately so that the girls, their communities, and their societies can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yates, for those wonderful words, encouraging. And in the interest of time, I would like to perhaps we hear a bit more from the Unicef Public Finance Specialist, Mr. Bob Mchabaiwa, to outline some other, to further outline is. Please take it over. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Hannah, our moderator, for the excellent coordination of this process. We are pleased to talk about possible modalities for financing girls' education in this particular region on this wonderful day of the International Girl Child. Now, before I start, let me make one fundamental point. And this point is that our true commitment to girls' education is measured not by the statements we make and the talks and the publications we publish, but by the level and quality of our investments in this noble cause. Hence, today we're talking about financing girls' education. So in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the sources of financing and specific modalities under each of those sources. Besides households, there are three fundamental sources, notably governments themselves, development partners or donors, and private sector. I want to start with governments. The first and foremost way of financing girls' education is through our budgets, whether at the federal or national level or at subnational level. And this is already happening in many countries. But the issue is the size and quality of the spending. Within those budgets, it's important for governments to ensure there are girls-specific budget lines. And there's a very interesting example of a budget line for girls' hostels in Malawi, which is very good. In Kenya, for instance, we have seen some counties introduce budget lines for scholarships and bursaries for girls. We have also seen some governments introducing social assistance programs to help the poorest and most vulnerable children access the much needed education. And this can be done through modalities such as cash transfers. And within that, we can embed school bonuses. We have seen programs such as the Basic Education Assistance Module in Zimbabwe and many other examples in our region. But besides specific allocations, there are also policy measures that have been introduced by some governments, and we encourage many to do so. For example, waiver of school fees. Many countries in this region have introduced a free primary education, but more needs to be done to address challenges at the secondary and tertiary level. And we have seen very interesting progress in Eswatini, for instance. We have also seen government supporting refugee education. You know, when I was listening to the input from our colleagues from UNHCR, I said, this is indeed what we need to get governments to support girls regardless of their migration status. Every girl child has the right to education. So there are so many modalities that governments can actually use to finance girls' education. But we are saying it is not only the responsibility of governments. Development partners also have a role to play. And I'm pleased that in this call, we have representatives from different funding partners who are supporting girls' education in Eastern and Southern Africa and across the region. They're providing grants. They are also supporting multi-country financing initiatives through the Global Partnership for Education, International Financing Facility for Education, and many others. But we also have interesting experiences from the past, such as education sector debt swaps that could be offered by creditors or donors to governments from poor countries. So there's so many things that development partners can do to support girls' education in the form of grants, technical assistance, in-kind support, debt relief, and swaps as an example. And lastly, I want to congratulate the private sector that is very actively involved in this space. We've just received an input from the Mastercard Foundation. A lot is happening, the Equity Bank, Econet in Zimbabwe. I can list many from all the countries that are represented here. They're providing scholarships, in-kind support, and there's a trend towards private-public partnerships for the provision of ICT, books, sanitary ware, wash facilities, and so on. So all these are very good initiatives, and we need to celebrate the private sector that has come on board and that are doing all they can to support girls' education. Some are even constructing and managing learning centers. This is good. But before I move to my last slide, I want to say it is important for governments, donors, and private sector to pay particular attention to certain categories of girls who are at high risk, who are the poorest and most marginalized. These include girls in rural areas, living with disabilities, who are pregnant or in early marriage, in farming and mining communities, a refugee, living in conflict areas, or experiencing violence. These require targeted and strategic support. Now with this, I want to conclude by providing what I term key enablers for sustainable financing of girls' education. And I saw in the chat box, there was a question, what do we do to children living with disabilities in pastoral communities? And I want to say everything starts with gender disaggregated data. It's important for governments to capture information on which girls are deprived and where they are. It's important for governments and donors to support gender analysis of the education sector. Who is benefiting from our financing? Girls, boys, right? We need to know that. Integration of gender in education sector plans, because policies and plans are not gender neutral. We may need even to consider gender markers in our annual budgets and our plans. And then, of course, ensuring that equity is a key consideration when we make decisions on how much should be allocated to what issues when we spend. And then, of course, I also wanted to emphasize the life cycle approach. This basically requires us to look at the needs of girls from as early as possible to the end. And lastly, strengthen oversight and accountability institutions, as well as develop and implement social equity policies. So ladies and gentlemen, our moderator, I want to say it is only through sustainable financing that we can deliver quality education for our girls. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. It's really important to know all the different options that sustainable financing can make the shape of. I would like to move on to my question now. The next panelist, I would like to introduce Mr. Jabin Mulwanda. He's the Permanent Secretary of the Zambia Ministry of Education. And
thank you,
my
moderator.
question. Thank you for joining us. The question is, what is Zambia's vision for investing in universal education? In particular, how does the Zambian government intend to address the issue of financing girls' education?
Thank you very much for that question. What I'll try and do, I'll speak to some of the things that we are doing, and then a few of what we intend to do. Firstly, like many speakers have mentioned, education is prioritized in virtually all our policy documents, strategic plans, national development plans. But particularly, girls' education has been prioritized by this government. This government intends to give girls the same opportunities as boys. We are actually at an interesting time in our country where we have witnessed a change of government from one party to the other. And interestingly, the new party in government has in its manifesto prioritized girls' education. And the intentions are that they would ensure that girls are provided with equal access to education by removing those barriers that hinder girls from progressing in education. And this was highlighted by the new president in his speech to the opening of Parliament, he emphasized girls' education once more. It was also highlighted when he spoke at the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, where the president committed to increasing access to secondary education for girls, particularly those from vulnerable households. This would be done through various ways, including financial aid and grant schemes. At the moment, we have been implementing a policy of free primary education for all learners, but we've also been implementing a policy of re-entry for girls, that for pregnant. After they've delivered, they can come back to school. We've also been running bursary schemes for orphans and vulnerable children at a ratio of 2 to 3 in favor of the girl child. We've been constructing girls' technical secondary schools, largely to encourage them and provide opportunities for these girls to pursue science and technology related courses at tertiary level. The participants may wish to know that in Zambia we have a pyramid in education where we have many primary schools. About the ratio of 10 to 1, you have 10,000 primary schools and only 1,000 secondary schools. So some people may not go to secondary school, not because they don't have what it takes, but because there's no space. And particularly girls are disadvantaged. So as a government, we've been building girls-only technical secondary schools so we can give them the opportunities that they so need. We have also been working with communities and other gatekeepers to sensitize them to prioritize girls' education. And this is through the various things we do to remove the barriers that hinder girls' education, including providing wash facilities. And participants may wish to know that for the very first time, sometime last year, we had a budget line for provision of free sanitary ware to our girl child in our schools. We also have school feeding programs that help us to keep our kids in school. Of course, this is some of what we're doing as government and financed by the government budget. Of course, there are cooperating partners that are also players in education. I've heard GPE being mentioned, USAID, and recently we have Global Fund, which is helping to support the vulnerable girls by providing them with a full package of school requisites, because school fees are just one thing, one item, but there are other needs that girls have that also have to be met if we're going to keep them in school. Going forward, our intention as a government is to increase domestic financing to all activities promoting girls' education by increasing budgetary allocation to the education sector in line with Continental Education Strategy for Africa and the Dakar Framework on the rights to education. Of course, we will continue to receive support from cooperating partners, but the most important thing is that our budgets must demonstrate our resolve to provide for the girl child. So in concluding, let me just say we, as a government, are focused on ensuring that girls have equal access to education, just as boys. And we will realize this through sustainable financing to education, through, among other things, increasing budgetary allocation to the sector. Participants may wish to know that we are in the middle of planning for next year. We're doing budgeting for next year. And already we are beginning to see, of course, I cannot say the details here because this is a process that is ongoing. But for me, in my position, I'm a very happy person, knowing that we are in a big way going to realize our commitments to education, and particularly education for the girl child. So thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Jabin. That was a wonderful response in relation to how you're supporting girls and keeping them in school with your government. I would like to introduce our final panelist from Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office from the UK government, Ms. Sandra Button. Ms. Sandra, thank you for joining us this wonderful time. My question to you will be, the UK government recently made a significant commitment to fund girls' education in Africa. How do you plan to leverage your commitment to encourage public funding and innovative partnerships for sustainable funding for girls' education?
Thank you, Hannah, and I hope you can hear me. Thank you for doing such a great job of moderating us today, and thanks to colleagues for such thoughtful reflections so far. I think with the time available, I'll just concentrate on sort of 3 areas of focus for the UK. But before I do, I'd just like to pick up a point that was made earlier by Kristen, our GPE colleague. We were very excited when the Global Education Summit raised 4 billion from donors, but of course that pales into complete insignificance compared to the 196 billion that was committed by developing country partners. And I think that's the window through which we look at the work that we do on girls' education. That ODA and donor contributions are important and significant, but they are nothing compared to what is invested by Zambia, for example, or all of our developing country partners. So in that sense, one of the critical areas of activity for the UK government, we think, is working with national government partners to help them get the best bang for the buck that they spend, so that every kwacha or shilling that's spent on girls' education is really delivering the best results. So the first kind of area of intervention for us is investing in the right things and supporting others to do that. The second is recognizing that, as many have said over the decades, we have been doing education the same for a very long time. And I think, interestingly, COVID has helped us jump outside of our education box and realize that sometimes we can do things radically differently. And we were forced to do that. But I think the second area of intervention for the UK is really around innovation. How can we do things quite differently to raise and spend money on girls' education? And then the third area for us, the third focus, and I'll speak to this in a minute, is using our development diplomacy. So bringing together the foreign, the FCO and DFID together, we now have much bigger development muscles than we ever had before. So it's how we use our development diplomacy to bring partners together to catalyze change and mobilize greater investment. So first of all, investing in the right things. Well, how to do this? I think for us, we think the most obvious approach is to improve the availability and, importantly, the use of evidence on what works for girls. So I spent 5 years in Kenya, and when I was there, I had the great pleasure of working on Tusome. Many of you who are based in Kenya will know about Tusome. And I think it's interventions like Tusome which prove to us that we can deliver significantly improved learning at scale in a gender responsive way for everyone, even the most marginalized. And so that's why we're really excited about the UK's new What Works Hub, which aims to collaborate with developing country partner governments to help look at how we shift constrained domestic resources from bad buys things that aren't delivering learning or are not keeping girls in school, to great or good buys that do help girls learn and do keep them in school. And the hub sits alongside our other investments in education research and global goods, including RISE, Young Lives, and the Global EdTech Hub. And of course, we also launched the Global Education Expert Advisory Panel with the World Bank in 2020, which produced the recent report on smart buys in education. So I guess our perspective is that with the right evidence and the right application of that evidence on what works for girls, it will be possible to build back equal in a sustainable way in the aftermath of COVID. And alongside our research, large programs like the Girls Education Challenge have been testing innovative new ways to get girls in school, keep them there and help them learn for the last 8 years in 17 countries. And out of that, we are also learning, really what does work and what gives us the best bang for our buck. So programs like CAMFED in Tanzania have really helped us to understand how to keep girls in school and how girls can work with other girls to help them learn and to support each other. And importantly, through that program, we've learned a lot about cost effectiveness. And I think in financing girls' education, that focus on cost effectiveness needs to really be stepped up. Again, this idea of bang for our buck. We've just done some recent financial work in Uganda with the government of Uganda, looking at where is the fiscal space to spend more on girls and on education in general. And if we can generate additional resources, what are the policy options to get, again, those best results? So evidence, I think, is absolutely critical. Then on innovation, I realize that this has been contentious in the past, but I do think it's worth flagging the potential of public-private partnerships to expand access and quality, but with a real focus on delivering for the more and the most marginalized, and particularly for girls. So I've had the pleasure of working with PEAS, which is Promoting Equality in African Schools, which is based both in Zambia and here in Uganda for a number of years now. And I've seen that, with the right partnership with government and with the right regulation and oversight by government, these low-fee private secondary schools are genuinely reaching some of the more marginalized girls and also generating great evidence and lessons about how to do that at scale and sustainably. So I think that's a really great example of innovation where a public-private partnership is working for the most marginalized and for girls. One other quick area of innovation that's of interest to us at the moment is results-based financing. And this takes advantage of the boom in ethical investing, attracting new philanthropic investment in education. And we've seen this through Benin's success in issuing its first social bond in international markets. So I think, being prepared to experiment with those kinds of instruments is how we will partner up in innovative new ways with others and really crowd in additional financing. And the UK is supporting two such programs in Ghana and Sierra Leone. And what I particularly like about those programs is the focus on equity, with additional payments being made for those who are the hardest to reach, in these cases, marginalized girls. So again, jumping outside of our education box and really trying to be creative. So I'll just finish on the idea of catalyzing partnerships and action and why this is so important for the UK. It's been quite a busy month for us, a busy 12 months, should I say. We used our G7 presidency to secure 2 new girls' education goals, putting foundational literacy at the heart of international action, as well as a really ambitious target on getting 40 million more girls in school. And those 2 goals are really driving how we think about our investments going forward, really thinking whatever we do, how is it going to drive getting more girls into school and really importantly, getting them learning. So I think those have been very helpful for us in reframing our business. We also hosted the Global Education Summit in London. As mentioned earlier, that did raise 4 billion, but I think what's really important is the 196 billion that was committed by developing country partners. And President Kenyatta did an amazing job pulling all of those countries together to think that through. And the UK will also host the COP26. And for the first time in COP26, we're going to bring together ministers of education and ministers of environment to talk about education and climate change. And we're going to use that opportunity again to really shine a spotlight on girls' education. So again, just using every opportunity we can, our development and diplomacy, to sort of bring partners together and to really shine a spotlight on what's needed at the macro level on girls' education. And then just maybe finally, I recently launched Girls' Education Action Plan, the GEAP, is a strategic plan for the next 5 years. And it's very focused on building coalitions and partnerships in support of bold education reform. And I would just like to make a quick plug for the Gender at the Centre initiative. I spoke with Antara about this initiative earlier in the week. I think it's a really great example of how we've got a big multi-stakeholder partnership that is really working together on girls' education to catalyze change at the ground level as well at the regional and the global level. So I think a real inspiration for potential future collaborations. Yeah, a quick gallop around some of the things that the UK is focused on in relation to girls' education. So to summarize, research and evidence, innovation, and then this idea of partnerships and how we come together around sort of key goals that we all share. So happy International Day of the Girl, and thank you for inviting me, Hannah.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra Button, for that wonderful response, for having able to fill us in the commitment and whatever the UK government is doing to promote the girl child, not just girl child education, but education in general. I see Ms. Shona is back. I would like to give her this opportunity. We are almost at the last stages. This opportunity to at least perhaps to answer the second question, which is, let me highlight it for you again. And which advice would you give to the private sector that want to engage for this cause? Ms. Shona.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So great question. And I've heard some really interesting interventions already from some of my fellow panelists, but I want to just start by saying private sector needs to dive in. The challenges that we are trying to tackle collectively are protracted, they are persistent. Access to education, access to dignified and fulfilling work for young people, for girls, for refugees, for young people with disabilities. This really requires an all hands on deck kind of approach. And so partnerships is the first thing that I would say. I think that this is really an opportunity for private sector to carve out a unique space also, and particularly here in Africa. And I do want to call out some really interesting work that the Amahoro Coalition is doing. And this is a coalition of African private sector organizations that are taking on and exercising a leadership role, using their voice and convening power to influence others to find solutions for the refugee challenge in Africa. Some of the things that I think private sector can do, as we heard, there's always financing gaps for scholarships. And so setting up a scholarship fund like Equity Bank did through its foundation for the Wings to Fly program, and I heard Dr. Bob mention that earlier, an amazing program with a national reach that's really having a transformative impact on the lives of young people across the country. Or private sector can channel funds to amazing organizations like FAWE, and I know that we'll hear from Martha later on. But this is a relatively easy way for private sectors to contribute. But private sector also has a role to play in creating internships and work opportunities for young people, particularly young women, refugees and displaced youth, and young people with disabilities. We know that young people need to practice their skills, they need to apply the knowledge that they're getting through education so that they are prepared to be successful in the workforce. So that's a really practical thing that private sector can do. Likewise, starting a mentorship program, pairing up members of your workforce with young people who are in school, in university, or just starting their careers. And this is especially impactful for young women and for other hard to reach groups who require role models and mentors in their field. Private sector in countries like Rwanda and Uganda should take advantage of progressive policy environments to advance inclusive recruitment as they're looking to build up their labor market, their workforce, and to create linkages between their businesses and refugee-led businesses, especially those led by refugee women. because this can increase access to other kinds of services and formal opportunities for those refugee women-led businesses, whether it's financing services or other business opportunities. And in countries where the policy environment is more constrained, just get involved. Learn, join hands with other private sector organizations, with government, with civil society organizations, and with refugee-led organizations to push for progress that's going to work for everyone. And certainly last but not least is engage young people themselves. Create spaces where you can listen to the perspectives, the challenges, the needs of young people and act. And I just want to say that the Scholars Program would be nowhere today without the feedback and the inputs that we've received over the years from young people, from our scholars, from young women, refugees, displaced youth, and young people with disabilities. So thank you very much, Hannah, for the opportunity to come back in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Shona. Indeed, it is important. I couldn't emphasize even more that partners work together to ensure we are able to give more opportunities. Thank you for sharing. Now, we are almost at the last stages of this discussion roundtable, and I would like to welcome Mr. Abian Rava, Head of Education from Unicef, to give some few remarks. Mr. Abian.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you for giving me this few minutes to address this gathering. First, let me profusely apologize on behalf of our regional director, Mohammed Fall. He couldn't join earlier due to some technical difficulties, and these things happen a lot these days. So without taking too much time and not going through the background, because we've heard a lot of speakers and panelists talk about many aspects of financing girls' education, I just want to jump right into some of the messages our regional director wanted to give to this gathering. So what is UNICEF doing and can do better to push for more innovative and sustainable funding for girls' education? We will continue to generate evidence and analyze data, including domestic budget briefs, to assess allocation and use of education budget and whether it is sufficiently gender sensitive. And we've heard several of our panelists talk about this. We will assist to better understand and integrate gender issues into education sector analysis and sector plans and ensure adequate focus on support to girls for their education. We will provide technical expertise to support governments in applying a gender perspective in the education management information systems, plans, and budgets. Again, we've heard several of our panelists talk about the importance of data and management information systems as well. We will support and contribute to innovative financing initiatives, such as the Secondary Education Trust Fund in Malawi, or implementing gender responsive budgeting in Uganda. And there are several other examples that are noteworthy in the region that we work in. We will, with all our partners, be a convening force at the regional and country levels to coordinate and advocate together for sustainable funding for girls' education and keep girls' education on the agenda of the Eastern and Southern Africa governments. So, in conclusion, it is our hope that after today's engagement, ministries of education and finance will continue to work together with their development partners and the private sector to innovate and improve financing of girls' education. Most notably, policymakers should consider the vulnerabilities and unique situation of girls when making spending decisions. For this to happen, there is need for comprehensive gender disaggregated data and application of a gender lens in budgeting. Private sector should ramp up their support for girls' education, including through public-private partnerships, corporate social investments, and innovative financing mechanisms. Close interministerial collaboration and a joint effort between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Finance are needed for a sustainable investment in girls' education. And lastly, government should work with the private sector, and this is so important, to close the gender digital divide, which is the theme of the 2021 International Day of the Girl Child today. This is critical, considering that girls have much less access to ICT services than boys do. So with that, and on behalf of our regional director, I wanted to thank everybody who has been in this panel and this meeting today. Thank you very much. And back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abian. It's really wonderful to hear from you, and apologies accepted. We have heard from such a diversity of thoughts from our different panelists, and because of time, I would like to tell you that I don't think I'll give the 1 minute response or discussion at this moment. I'll just like to invite Ms. Clementine, if she's still here, to give maybe some final thoughts on what all the panelists have discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you also to our distinguished speakers on the panel and our audience who have followed our discussions. I noted that we had about 145 people connected, and this really clearly indicates the level of interest in refugee girls' education. It has been invaluable having key partners in education discuss and suggest solutions to the challenge of financing girls' education, and that refugee girls and other displaced groups are not left behind in the proposed solutions. I would particularly like to thank our moderator, Hannah. Hannah, you are an inspiration to us, and you represent a beacon of hope to all young refugee girls who yearn for an education. We know that the journeys of refugee girls are particularly difficult ones, with many hurdles, obstacles, twists and turns. Your achievements and your willingness to lend your voice to this issue not only provides us with unique insights, but will motivate all of us to continue our advocacy work to ensure that refugee girls can, through education, realize their potential and equip themselves with the tools and knowledge to support themselves, their families, and contribute to the development of their communities. Allow me to reiterate UNHCR's commitment to work with all our education partners, NGOs, donors, governments, and affected communities to establish more affirmative actions on girls' education, access to education. We need to focus on protection. Those girls who are furthest behind, as was said, we need to understand the barriers, why they exist, and how to overcome them, create better learning environments, empower girls and their agency, ensure disaggregated data is available, as well as the integration of gender in policy plans. These are some of the ideas and some of the suggestions that came to the fore during our discussions. As we have heard from Yasmin at Education Cannot Wait, Roger from Plan International and others, this is a collective effort, effort that ensures that as we tackle this against the backdrop of the COVID pandemic, we are able to build back, and in doing so, build back in a transformative and sustainable manner. I thank the governments, development agencies such as FCDO, private sector, and the many foundations that have prioritized financing girls' education and who have committed to include refugee girls in their efforts. As was very clearly underlined by the colleague from Unicef, the level and quality of our investment is crucial. We will continue to encourage others to invest along these lines. UNHCR's campaign on 15 by 30 cannot be achieved if girls are left behind. It was clear listening to Christine representing the GPE that every country has different needs, and we will work together to develop targeted response plans. Public-private partnerships are crucial to drive forward innovative financing mechanisms that include refugees and other displaced and marginalized communities. This type of collaboration is the most sustainable way that all families will have access to livelihoods and afford to send their children to school. Roger from Plan International highlighted that support to improve quality of education will directly ensure that girls are able to stay in school. And I would like to reiterate the point from Shona at Mastercard that we need to work together to provide opportunities for job placements, internships, mentorships, and apprenticeships. If we educate them today, they will become our partners in finding solutions for the next generation of girls. We have heard the impact that the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program has had on girls such as Anna and Rabah, and I look forward to working with all partners to achieve gender parity in refugee girls' access to education and to achieving the 50 by 30 goal, notably that by the year 2030, 15% of all eligible refugees attain higher education. I must also thank Mr. Mwanda from the government of Zambia, whose contribution was important to highlight the difference government interventions can make when the government plans and budgets for the education of girls. Let me echo the words of Antara, that it is our hope that we progressively move toward a time when there will be no need to have a day dedicated to the girl child because they would have achieved full equality. Until then, let me add my voice to those of other participants and wish you all a happy International Day of the Girl Child. Thank you. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clementine, for those wonderful words or final thoughts, and we really appreciate your time. Moving on, this has been a wonderful moment. Personally, I would like to thank I'm very thankful for being given this opportunity to moderate this session and interact with some of the best brains in the humanitarian industry. I think it's a privilege, and I have learned so much and feel this is the best way to celebrate this day, the International Day of the Girl Child. I couldn't have spent it in any other way. This has been a wonderful time for me, and I would encourage all of you to the voices that you've kept here or the discussion that you have given to be implemented, and it has been a wonderful way to share this day with all of you. And finally, I would like to hand over to Ms. Martha from FAWE, that is Forum for African Women Education, Ms. Martha Muhezi, to close this roundtable discussion. I've been your moderator because I don't think I'll have any other chance to talk again. My name is Hannah, and I thank you all. Have a good time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. And I know Clementine has thanked you, but allow me add my voice to thank you more sincerely for moderating the session. When we talk about girls' empowerment, these are the girls that we are talking about. And I also take the opportunity to thank Unicef, SRO, UNHCR, UNGAI, and this is the team that FAWE has been part of to host this event. There was no better way of marking this day than hosting this event. I thank you so much. To all the speakers, I know Clementine has thanked you, but allow me again, thank you for the very, very rich discussion. What is very critical is knowledge. And like it's always said, knowledge is power. And all that we have discussed during this event is knowledge. And the knowledge that gives us understanding of the plight of women, the plight of girls. And what we've discussed here, I can just summarize it in a few words. What we have focused on in this discussion today, it was basically looking at the challenges that girls face, particularly in the area of education. And when we are looking at girls' education, we are asking ourselves, what are these challenges? We are also asking ourselves, what needs to be done for each and everybody to understand these challenges? And what is it that needs to be done to make sure that these challenges are addressed? In other words, what needs to be understood? What needs to be done? How should it be done? Because there is understanding, but not knowing how to address it. So we are just asking ourselves, what do we need to do? And if we know what to do, how best can we do it? Or in other words, what is the best approach to addressing all these challenges? And at the end of it, we are all mentioning, if all this is done correctly, then we shall expect the best outcome of all the investments that we put into investing in girls' education. I just want to quickly run through some of the key highlights. And one of the issues that I take note of is about the refugee girls. All girls have challenges, but again, it is critical to understand that not all girls are homogeneous. There are girls in refugee situations. They face different challenges. There are girls with a disability, like it was mentioned. They have different challenges. And what does that mean? It means they need different investment. So much as we're investing for the girls, but we need to understand the different needs. We also went ahead to discuss issues to do with financing. And I like the question that was asked. When we are talking about financing for girls' education, what does this mean? You know, and it went ahead, the representative went ahead to mention issues to do with budgeting. And this still goes back to understanding what you're budgeting for, understanding the needs that we are addressing. And once we have that critical understanding, then our investment will yield good results. We also went ahead to listen to, if we are talking about investment, what does it mean? It's not a show for one person. It's not a show for an individual. It calls for partnerships. And when we talk about partnerships, we are talking about the public-private partnerships. All stakeholders coming together, appreciating the challenges and coming up with solutions. We listen to issues about data. With the rightful data, the chances of getting the rightful solutions are very high. And therefore, it's important to have data, not just data, but data that has evidence, data that is well analyzed, and data that is of a gender nature. And once we have that kind of data, then the investments that we shall do shall be the rightful investments. I also want to mention the issue when we are talking about investing in girls' education. We are not talking about basic education. Yes, correct. Basic education is important. But the higher one goes, the more one gets empowered and the higher the chances of being part of the decision-making processes. And what does that mean? When everybody is given an opportunity to be part of the process, we are able to give the ideas that would contribute to the best investment in girls' education. And it was also mentioned that when we are talking about girls' education, we need to be mindful that the girls themselves need to be part of the process. It's no longer the time where we have to sit at the tables and plan for them, but it's a time for us to give them opportunity so that they are able to contribute, to make contribution to what is required. What is it that they need? What kind of support do they need? So that is very, very critical in terms of having meaningful investment in girls' education. We also talked about scholarships, and it came out very clearly from the Mastercard Foundation. That is an example of the private sector. I would talk in terms of, from an experience point of view, as FAWE as an organization who have been partners for the Mastercard Foundation for now close to 10 years. And what has happened is Mastercard came up with what we call a comprehensive scholarship support. Because when you are supporting a girl child, it's not that her need is tuition. It's far, far beyond the tuition. There are so many other challenges that these girls face. And because of that, those challenges, they need more support. And that's why there was a mention of mentorship. It's very critical, role models, and also engaging the young people into participating in their own development. And that is one of the issues that the private sector needs to pick on, a holistic approach, and also making sure there is no duplication of efforts where you find many partners concentrating in one area, one location, and yet the problem is at a global level or at a wider scale. As I conclude, I also want to mention one of the issues which came out and which was about the level. I may not conclude without mentioning this. The level and quality of investment is very critical. In other words, it's not more about the size, but it's more about the quality of investment. Because in many cases, we may say we are supporting 1,000 girls, but what are we giving the 1,000 girls? I think it's about the quality that is very, very critical. And one of the speakers went ahead to say, it's not about the publications that we make, it's not about the documentaries that we come about, but it's more about the quality of investment that we make. And I've already mentioned this, but allow me to say, data analysis, data collection is very critical in terms of having the right investment in girls' education. And we also, last we heard about the representative from the UK government. And one of the things that I really picked out of that, it's about prioritizing. It's about getting our priorities right. And once we have our priorities right, then we shall make the right investment. I want to end at that. And once more, I want to say thank you to all that have been part of this discussion. I know we needed, one day is not enough, or a few hours is not enough for us to really deliberate and make presentation in terms of what needs to be done if we are to invest rightly in girls' education. But this has been a very, very rich discussion, very enlightening. And I want to believe that all of us present in this discussion have learned something, and we are taking something out of this discussion. And not only taking something, but taking something that we are going to implement to improve investment in girls' education. Again, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your contribution, and thanks for being part of this discussion. Thank you. And I know Hannah said she was handing over, she was not going to say anything else, and therefore, we are free to leave at will. And again, let's have many more of these discussions. Thank you.